Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, archiving Polaroid pictures of your 1980s hair metal band, or else a scrappy upstart, curating the Instagram feed for your post-punk side project, this is your show, because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the first Friday of December 2021, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Claude who drove a Kia Optima with a broken sunroof and who was always trying to sell you caffeine pills that he claimed was designer French speed. And old Claude would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now. You guys, that's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in: hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, the first Sunday night of every month, this is new, it's not weekly anymore, but the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on YouTube for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we've built something of a community over there, including many people who are listeners to this show. So come on over and be a part of it. That is the first Sunday of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Head on over to YouTube and search for Joe Pug, or go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay for, of course, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would give the price of a cup of coffee each month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who is supporting us over there at Patreon. And if you're not in a place where you can contribute that way, there's still a couple ways that you could help for free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. This was an absolutely illuminating conversation with Mr. Butch Walker, and I hope you dig it. My guest this week got his start playing in glam rock bands before becoming a highly sought-after producer and co-writer who now also records under his own name. Butch Walker grew up in Cartersville, Georgia, before following his own star to Los Angeles as a young man. After a decade of near misses with a few bands, and even a bona fide radio hit with Marvelous 3, he began taking on projects as a producer. He's now produced albums and co-written with artists such as Pink, Weezer, The Wallflowers, Avril Lavigne, Katy Perry, Dashboard Confessional, Train, Panic at the Disco, Taylor Swift, Green Day, and a host of others. Over the years, he has recorded for Virgin, Elektra, and Danger Bird Records. Rolling Stone called his most recent album an ambitious but succinct rock opera. Spin Magazine says that same album demands repeated listens. And Tape-Op Magazine says that he has the best job in the world. Butch has seen the absolute heights of the music business and has written chart-topping songs along the way. It was absolutely engrossing to get to hear about his journey so far. Butch Walker, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. When you were first starting out playing music in Georgia, you took your band all the way across the country to LA, and in short order, you had a major label record deal. That's something that happens in movies all the time, but I've been in the music business long enough to know that that's not really something that happens in real life too much. So how did you even conceive of making such an aggressive move like that, and how did it come to fruition?
Well, I guess considering this was the 1900s and it was 1988 to be exact, and I was 18 years old, and coming out of a town in North Georgia, very kind of not even technically a suburb, about an hour outside of Atlanta, that was very much like the movie Footloose, so it was kind of like there wasn't a lot of people that shared my dream of being in a rock band and touring and putting out records and that kind of thing. There just wasn't, because I don't think the apples fell far from the tree there, and those were just different apples. And I had a group of guys that I had met up in Rome, Georgia, which was even further away, which was another half hour outside of any major city. But it was a bigger city. I was born in Rome, Georgia. So I took guitar lessons up there from this guy named Jerry King, and he was a Berkeley grad and just this most passionate, crazy madman, jazz guitarist, and super driven and opinionated, and kind of like the softcore porn version of the movie the movie Whiplash. It was like he wasn't going to throw anything at you, but he almost would. He taught a whole stable of kids up there, and that's where I found my tribe, because after middle school, I didn't really have friends grow apart. Like my son's going through it right now, where, his only two friends are not, they're just not buddies anymore. They don't connect on anything, on any level. They start figuring out who they are. And I figured out who I was, and my childhood friends, they had kind of moved on, and I had moved on, and I didn't really have anybody I could relate to that wanted to do what I did, except for up here in Rome at this guy's music studio where he taught guitar. And he taught guitar. He had a guy that taught drums, that taught bass, and they put these groups together, ensembles. And we would go play like instrumental ensembles with literally like 8 guitar players up front and a bass player and a drummer. And they were all students of King Brothers, which was the name of his company. And that's where I met my guys. That's where I met my band that we would form, and we ended up moving out there together to LA, because honestly back then, and this would have been 88, there was no option. There was no internet, there was no grassroots making it out of a small town like you can now. Literally, if you just strike internet gold or social media presence and whatever. Back then it was literally, you had to go to where the action was. And the action was in Los Angeles or New York. And LA being more so, I think, and a little bit more conducive to what we were doing at the time, which was nothing shy of butt rock. You know, we were doing like hair metal, which was very popular at the time, and we were just young metalhead teenager, you know, stoners and drinkers that wanted to go be living out our Motley Crue dreams, and at the time that's what we did. So we moved out there with literally barely a dime to our names and no contacts and no referrals, and had to start combing the classifieds for an apartment. Landed right in East Hollywood, right off of Hollywood Boulevard, and you know, the second week we were there was these big riots that were historic at this point by Hollywood standards, and we were very much we were into the wild, as you would say. We had become feral cats, and we loved it. It was literally like heavy metal spring break every day. But it was fucking hard. It was really hard. You know, you did not, your band just didn't move out there and get discovered right away. You know, I mean, there was literally 10,000 bands doing the same thing you were doing at the same place, promoting their shows. Trying to even get shows was really hard. It was not easy to get gigs. And you had to pay for those gigs. You had to pay to play, which is where the term kind of came from. It was, or at least it was in that world, not in the radio world, but in the show world out there, where you had to get into the clubs by hustling your way in, and all of a sudden you had to play, you had to show up at soundcheck to play with all of the money for the tickets that they said you had to pay for. You had to literally sell, like, I think the average was like 100 tickets as an opening band, and they'd have 5 bands on a bill every night. They were raking in money because these poor suckers would go out there, and these bands the headliner would actually get paid because they worked their way up the chain, and the other 4 bands would have to sell tickets and then come in and turn that money in, 100% of the money, to the promoter at soundcheck, or you did not play, which means a lot of those bands had to make up the difference, because you didn't move to LA and all of a sudden have 100 fans. You had to go out and sell 100 tickets on the Sunset Strip and tell these people out there, you know, mostly by and large, you know, it was a big female demographic out there, because they were all coming to look at the dudes in bands. It was a, you know, it was a very weird world where there just wasn't sadly there wasn't a lot of female presence in rock and roll out there. It was by and large men and boys, I should say, in bands, and out there promoting themselves and trying to sell tickets to men and women, mostly women, on the Strip, and convince them that you were the best band that they would ever see. It was all a hustle game. It was super hustle. Like, you had to be charming as shit. You had to, like, go out there and we turned up our Southern accents even more, because we sounded like walking banjos anyway by the time we had left 18 years of rural Georgia. And so they loved that. We stood out a little bit, enough to where we could, like, go and sell our tickets and show up at the shows. And first couple of shows we had to make up some ticket difference, but after that we were selling all of the tickets and then some. And I mean, you know, within a year we were signed to a major label. So it was a really fast move for a lot of bands. It took years and years, and most time it didn't happen at all. So we got lucky and squeezed through that rat hole. Sorry, I probably answered like 7 questions.
No, that's fantastic. What do you think you took away from, specifically, like, artistically, and how you still make music now? What do you think you took away from going through that crucible of there being 10,000 bands, it being pay to play, such few opportunities to get stage space, and you guys found a way to do it? How do you think that changed how you viewed art and how you make it?
Well, I knew that no matter what, and no matter what genre of music we were doing at the time, which it's not taken seriously this day and age by a lot of people, but I can say this, that, like, you had to be really good at your instruments, and you had to be really good at singing and entertaining, or you were just a drop in the bucket of a million bands doing the same thing. And so I think the one thing it taught us was literally, you got to bust your ass, because it's not going to be handed to you. You can't buy your way in all the time. And to stand out, you had to be better than everybody else, and that meant we really worked hard and rehearsed every day on our vocals, our harmonies, our even our live show. Because at that time, that was a very big thing with that genre, was like a flashy live show. And even though that doesn't parlay into modern times as far as like the way that people put on live shows now, it's not the same. And that's okay, but what it does do is it instills this work ethic in you at a young age that, okay, most of the people, including people in our band, were just dropping like flies and moving straight back because they couldn't handle it, because they couldn't take the workflow, they couldn't take the competition. It was super competitive, but it was friendly, but it was still competitive. And that to me was the key, is that, and even long after that record deal came and went, which it did, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. We got signed, and we were the next Great White Hype, and we ended up getting $1 million pumped into us, and they promoted the shit out of it, and it just did not live up to the expectations of the label or the financial red hole that we were in, the black hole that we were in. That being said, it said to us immediately, we have to go out and do this ourselves. If we're going to do anything, we're going to have to do it just like we did when we moved to LA. We're going to have to go out and get in a van and start from scratch and make fans the only way we know that you can at that time, which is not online and not virally and not anything like that. You had to literally go out and just play a show in a town and go back a month or two later and play it again. And you're doing this at a different town every night, and as you know, and this is how it works for some people still today, where you go from playing to the bartenders and the waitresses to playing to their friends, that word of mouth, and then next thing you know, you can sell the place out if you're good. So right. I think I took away the work ethic from it, and I think I took away that also that I didn't want to get confined to one genre of music, because by the time we had already come out with our record, that genre was dead, and we were victims of that timing.
That's something I really want to talk to you. I'm so fascinated with this time period here of, you have, and these are your own words, you called it butt rock there, but you have what most of us would call it like hair metal, or like the Motley Crue sound. You have that. It's the most dominant cultural force that there is in popular music at that time. And then it seems to me from the outside looking in that Nirvana Nevermind comes out, and in a matter of like 3 weeks, the musical world and the pop culture world looks entirely different. Is that what it was? Was it Nevermind coming out? Or like, what happened to make such a quick cultural shift?
It was very much a victim of the times, but I didn't look at it as a victim. I looked at it as a blessing. And this was kind of tough, because a lot of people in this world that I was in, my peers, and even some bandmates, were like, you know what, this sucks. This genre is getting, decimated by this new sound and this new movement of kids that don't want this and that. And I was like, this is great. I was like, first of all, I was excited about new music always, and I still am to this day. I still am excited about new music constantly. I mean, I don't make music even today that sounds like, Billie Eilish or Tame Impala or whatever, which I love both of them, but it just wouldn't be genuine if I did that. But at the same time, I always am a fanatic of new music, and at the time, being a young kid barely out of his teens, and this tide shifting, I was super excited about it, because it gave us this liberation of, first of all, if you sat around and complained about, getting left in the dust by by some other genre, because your what you considered your genre or whatever has come and gone, like all fads do. They all do. It's all cyclical, and you can sit around and grovel in that, but if you do, you literally are just going to be bitter and go nowhere the rest of your life, because you're just going to be pissed off all the time, and you're not going to grow, because I that never appealed to me. It never appealed to me to, go through the drive-through every day and order the same, number 3 meal every day and drink the same Diet Coke. And when they change the formula, I get pissed. I was never that kid. I was never that guy. I grew up on so many different kinds of music. Even though I landed in hard rock when I was a teen, I think by design, and it was not to me a big deal to like have to go, okay, well, let's explore something else. We're still figuring our shit out. We're still finding out who we are and what we are. I mean, I still am figuring myself out, and I'm 51 years old, 52 this weekend. So it's like, I'm not even sure that will ever stop. But it's also, I feel like what's kept me in this world for so long, in this music world. I've been very fortunate, but at the same time, if our band would have been successful doing that back in the late 80s, early 90s, I probably wouldn't be talking to you here right now, because one little thing sets off a chain of events, and that would have been, if we would have been successful, maybe I wouldn't have been taken seriously or even given the time of day for something that I felt more passionate about, that I was into and doing down the line. And that seems to be the case with a lot of people. So,
well, and not only that, Butch, but I think sometimes the artists themselves, I've noticed with friends who have had a lot of success early on, maybe you've noticed this too, but when you have that success off the break, you yourself almost become a prisoner to that, because you're afraid that trying anything else won't be as successful, and it probably won't, if something gets really huge off the break. So I've seen it kind of be what do you call it, golden handcuffs or velvet handcuffs on people in their own mind.
yes, that's exactly true, is that you can't chase what you had. I tried it, later in life. My band that was doing this, alternative alt rock thing in the late 90s, we had a runaway yet marginal hit, top 5 hit at radio before we could even get a record deal, because nobody would sign us. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just because we looked weird, and people just didn't want anything to do with a band that was at the time wearing eyeliner and skinny ties and black spiky hair and tight black jeans like the Ramones. And that was our thing. But of course, a few years later, that was the style for everyone. I'm not taking credit for it, but we always jokingly said we were 5 years too early and 15 years too late. Because we were just recycling shit that we liked from 15, 20 years ago, like when we were growing up as teenagers, when we liked, early 80s, garage and kind of punky stuff as well. So we were doing that, and it sat nicely musically, but not aesthetically on the radio. So we got signed, and our band had this one-hit wonder situation with a song called Freak of the Week, and next thing you know, we're playing all the late night Conan, Letterman, Leno, all that stuff, and have a video on MTV and yada yada, and doing the torturous morning show radio, fucking pie eating wet t-shirt contest, basically, things that they make you do as an artist when you're just like, oh, that's right, it's not about the music, it's about like doing favors for people. So sorry, I got sidetracked with my surliness, and so that being said, we chased that song, and we chased that for the next record. I chased it for several years, going, oh, I got to get back on that, I gotta make that again. And you can't. Yeah. I mean, it's not easy. I mean, there's plenty of huge examples of artists, like Alanis Morissette's first record, or Green Day's first real, major label release with Dookie and things like that, where they sell 10 million records and go diamond or whatever that's called, and then you just go, okay, well, that's lightning in a bottle, and it never measures up on the next record, because first of all, everyone and their mother has heard you to death by the end of that record. Yeah. They're not everybody's ready for that again, or they don't want it again. Maybe they need a break from it. So I think having that, once letting go of chasing that, whether it be for those artists or whether it be for myself, even on a smaller level, it's when things started to get better. And I think the quality of the music started to get better, which does not always equate to sales, but I've always said there's a difference between a good song and a hit song sometimes.
How did you at that point, because I mean, you just described getting that first major label deal with your band that came to Los Angeles. You said that kind of came and went. You talk about having this top 5 hit and then kind of chasing that. Things didn't work out. How do you get to that point in your career? You've seen all these levels of success, but you've never seen this thing completely work out. How did you avoid, frankly, like how did you avoid like a really cynical path? Because then what you end up doing is leaning into your solo career, leaning into your production career that everyone knows you for now. How did you avoid basically a more negative path with all that stuff?
I didn't avoid it. I was negative. I was cynical along the way many times. And I just had to get my ego checked, and I had to get my heart checked to know that it's be better, not bitter, I guess is a way to put it. Is just I guess when you've had that many failed attempts at what people consider success, where I was signed to, God, I've been on like 6 or 7 label deals in my lifetime, and that is no badge of honor. That's fucking terrible. Like, I mean, that's not something anybody should brag about. That just means they didn't work out and they weren't good. Right. And also their expectations of you maybe weren't good. And so it's like, it just always ended in sour grapes. And I think though, watching other people come up that were opening for you and then all of a sudden were huge, success stories a year later, and that happened to me way too many times to count, and I could give you many examples. But that's also just because I've been touring for 30 years, so it's like if you don't stop, you're gonna literally see everybody twice in the world. Yep. And so it was hard sometimes to not just be happy for these people. It was easy to be jaded and be pissed off and be like, well, why, and think you're better and not understand why people don't want better. They just want, accessible or whatever. And it's like, whatever. I don't consider myself Radiohead or anything. So it's like, it's not like I wasn't making accessible music. I still think my music is called pop music, I mean, even though it's not Bieber or whatever, it's its own version of pop, the way the Beatles were pop, I think, Yeah. And so it's hard not to get jaded about it, but the more you keep your head down and trudge forward, the less time you have to focus on your periphery, and sometimes your periphery is dangerous, and sometimes thinking about those things too much can get you inside your own head too much and make you very cynical.
Is part of getting out of your head there, well, let me phrase this question a different way. You're very well known now for your production work. And when did you begin producing, and did that kind of dovetail with this ability to start enjoying the success of other people, helping to facilitate the success of other people and feel it from a deep and genuine place?
Yeah, sorry. That really did help. And that was I fell into that world because I always knew I was always going to be in control and ultimately try to be in control of my own career, and that means making my own records, playing everything, writing everything, recording everything. So Prince was one of my big influences, as more just as an idol, as far as being a one-man wrecking crew, and I loved that he was a consummate showman. He was an incredible singer, incredible multi-instrumentalist, producer, songwriter, just a powerhouse. And that was huge for me. So the fact that he made it by the time he was 20 years old, 21, doing that, I was like, well, that gives me hope. So also I learned to record all of my stuff and other people's demos and things like that, because I couldn't afford the $2,000 a day fancy studios that were at the time. That's what you're going to pay.
Yeah.
If you wanted to go in and record a record that sounded not like ass, because at the time there was no digital recording, no Pro Tools, no computers. You literally went from graduating from a 4-track cassette in your or 8-track reel to reel in your basement to going to one of those big studios where they have 24-track 2-inch tape machines and everything. And if you know what's going on and your engineer's good and your producer's good, you can make an album that sounds like it belongs on the radio or in everyone's car stereo. And I didn't have the money, so I had to learn how to do all that stuff myself. So I learned on 4 tracks and everything else. And so when I ended up getting into it later in life, and this goes back to that band, the Marvelous Three, that had that one-hit wonder in the late '90s. I had recorded that all in my bedroom, all of it.
Wow.
And it
Dang.
was, and so it ended up on the radio everywhere. And I was like, oh, so yeah, you can do this without spending millions of dollars or even thousands of dollars. And so all of a sudden I started getting calls. I promise I'm going to answer your question. Started getting calls from people that were like, oh, who produced that? Who recorded that? Who wrote that? And I would just be like, well, I did. And, with the help of my drummer from my band playing drums and my bass player playing bass. And then I just kind of did everything else on a newly purchased, beat up, used computer that had this early version of Pro Tools on it, and that's how I learned to record on that format that was starting to be the industry standard at that time, and that's what every record on the radio was made on. So I started getting calls from people going, well, can you make that record for we just signed this band, we just signed this artist, this singer, and it just fell into my lap. And when it did, that's when I think the perception did change a little bit, where I was able to really feel good and having a sense of accomplishment outside of myself. And it was really wonderful to help somebody achieve their goal, making their art, and it succeeding for them. And you feel a part of it, but at the same time, you are not the focus. So it's humbling. It's
Yeah.
good for your ego, or bad, however you want to look at it. And then it's also very exciting because you just felt invigorated by helping somebody else. It felt good. It was like helping out somebody that needed help. And I think that's when I started to feel maybe less cynical, less jaded, and realize that there was more to life than just me being front and center on the stage going, let me tell you about my problems. So
Yeah. Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. Butch has had immense success when it comes to crafting commercial music that is beloved by millions. But it was an album of his that had a much narrower and darker focus that brought me to him. Go figure, I know. Afraid of Ghosts was his 2015 album that explored the loss of his father. It's a harrowing listen, and it reminds me of this poem of loss by Kathy Mangan entitled Shattering the Glass. You must have found me wherever I sat reading in our still house one Saturday to say, follow me to the basement, that cracked window to the crawl space. I've delayed replacing it long enough. Come help me fix it. We descended the cellar stairs. You helped me balance on my knees atop the wash sink. We began repairs by shattering the glass. You let me swing the towel-wrapped hammer, then smiled and asked, sometimes don't you feel like smashing something? We peered into the dimness. Years passed. Father, I waited too long to tell you. It was light, an open palm we broke through to. In your mind and in your experience, what is the job of a producer?
The job of a producer is broad. The description is vast. There is many types of producers. One being, let's say, there's a guy who came up learning the engineering side of it and is an incredible engineer and music soundscape, creator, and can put the right combination of microphones on cabinets with guitars and drums and vocals and work a console and make something sound incredible, but maybe they don't have much to do with the musical process, whether it be the songs, the melodies, whatever. There's a lot of them that I consider to be incredible producers that are just engineers and have made incredible records that sound like they have revolutionized, sounds and set standards. And then there's guys that come in the room and never learned to play a single instrument in their life, don't know how to work any of the knobs in the studio, none of the gear, and they are strictly almost like a psychologist for the band and the artist. They know how to make the artist get the best performance, but they don't know a lick about theory or music or anything. And that happens a lot. Or maybe they're just really good at pairing up with good people. Maybe they're just a really good A&R person where they know how to find and discover great talent, where all they got to do is just come in with an engineer, mic it up, and just hit record, and it's going to be fucking great no matter what, because the artist is great. And they don't need magic skills musically. Then there's ones that can do it all. And so, I feel like I've always strived to be, like I said, the one that can do kind of a little bit of everything. I put my 10,000 hours in growing up, learning how to make things sound great and how to mic and how to engineer and EQ and compress things and mix them and work the gear. And of course, that's a whole other rabbit hole you can go into, because then that becomes a money and time sucking passion is gear. And then also just growing up studying songwriting and studying what makes a song tick and what makes a person tick when they hear that song and how it affects them. So being able to balance all that out between one person is a lot more work, but it's gratifying. And my control freak self loves it. So
what did you have to improve at the most to kind of bring all those skill sets together?
I had to improve first of all, social skills. You can be in the studio with, and matter of fact, I'd say half the time, if you're in the room with a genius, not myself, I'm saying I'm saying someone who's a genius that can come in, that's this genius songwriter, producer, engineer, maybe whatever they are, but because they are a genius, they didn't have much. They didn't have much social interaction with humans growing up, and man, some of those people are dreadful to be in the room with because they are either there's zero personality, there's zero feedback, zero emotion, or there's too much of it and ego. And I had to just kind of learn, because I don't consider myself a genius, but I consider myself a jack of all trades, and that has at least blessed me to get to where I am today, doing what I do and still getting calls to do it. But at the same time, you cannot be taught a personality. You cannot be taught dynamics, couth, tact, things that you really kind of got to work on when you're around artists and you're on the other end of the glass where you're working and they're doing their art and it's about them, and you've got to get your shit out of the way because it can be very combative, and a lot of times a producer will try to win an argument for the sake of winning it because they just are convinced that they are right and their way is always the only way, and you can end up damaging an artist for life doing that. And I've had it happen to me where it's like left me kind of PTSD from working with people that were just tyrants and didn't want to listen and didn't want to hear out any of your ideas and didn't want to know anything you had to say because they thought their shit didn't stink. And it's not cool. Because you have to think about the fact that this artist you're working with, if it's their first record, it could be their last. This could be the last record they ever get to make because either they may, Jesus Christ, they die in a plane crash the next day, or not as dramatic, they just go, that was a terrible fucking experience. I never want to do this again. I'm out. I'm going back to working at the record store because at least that was fun. And at least I get to be around music and not around people that are assholes. And so I think you have to treat it like this could be their last record because it's not going to be my last record. I'm going to go on and produce another. And I had to think that growing up, whenever I was coming up making records where I was on the other side of the glass and somebody was producing me, and I was thinking, they get to do this every month. They get to work with somebody every month. They get a new fresh start and a second chance every time. And I get one chance. I get one shot.
Right.
And so as an artist, so I try to put myself in the shoes of the artist always thinking, well, do I want this person to be proud of this record or do I want to win every argument just for my own ego? And then I walk away happy, but they're miserable with their record.
Right. So that's interesting. You're bringing up a lot of the responsibilities you feel like that a producer has to an artist. Do you feel like an artist, if they're acting in good faith for the album process, do you feel like they have any responsibilities to the producer or the process itself?
Well, sure. I think that first of all, the artist does need, you do need to vet the situation. I think that going in cold is very hard. I've tried it and it doesn't always work, where you go in to make a record with somebody you've never met and never even spent more than a day in the room with, or hung out and had coffee with or lunch or something and just gotten to talk and get to know the personality, because it's, half the time that'll determine whether or not the date goes any further. And I've had that happen more times than not, where it's like, not only do I not call them back, but sometimes people don't call me back. And I think that's okay, because fair enough, because I've gotten halfway through a record and wanted to bail on it because of how miserable the experience was. And I think it's just like a relationship. Even though it's a temporary relationship as far as a close quarters situation, it's like a temporary roommate. You have to like really know that that this is going to work for whether it be 2 weeks or 2 months. There needs to be some dynamic fleshed out first, and to me that's very, very important.
For all the artists that you've worked with over the years, both in your own bands and producing, the ones that have been successful artistically or in business, either way, what is a quality that they all share with each other in common?
What's a quality that all artists share from working with them?
Yeah, what's a quality that the ones that, let me phrase it a little bit better. Of all the artists that you've worked with over the years, of the ones that you admire, what is a quality that they have that they share with one another?
Oh yeah, sorry. I I would have to say it certainly isn't musical because it's been all across the board. The kind of artists I've gotten to work with musically, and also the skill set. I mean, some of my favorite records might have been with people that were not a master of their instrument, whether it be a voice or an instrument. But I think it's people that see a bigger picture, there's a broad stroke that is important. Not just seeing what's right in front of you and worrying about what's going to be awesome that day. It's more about like, can you look 5 years down the road, or can you see the record when it's done? Can you see that in your out your windshield when you're making it? Instead of people that can be their own worst enemy by second guessing themselves to death. That drives me crazy. And I realize it's a thing, and it's okay because every musician has insecurities, and they do, and some are worse than others about it. But there's a common thing that I tend to like about the people I've worked with that I consider to be great are the ones that see the big picture. They just see. They're like, well, that's okay. What we're doing right now is not going to affect the whole big picture. Let's say it's like we're jumping over a hurdle of like, I don't know what. I mean, it could be anything. It could be like, I can't get this part exactly right on the melody or the drum part or whatever. And it's like, well, let's work at it, but let's don't let it kill our spirit for the whole record just based on one, 4 seconds of the record. Having big picture is so important.
So the feedback loop worked in one direction where from all these years, playing your own music, playing with bands, it informed how you produced music. You still have a very robust and wonderful solo career and output. Has the feedback loop worked in the opposite direction as well, where your experience producing has changed the way that you produce and write your own music?
Absolutely. I mean, I learn something new every time. And that's one of the beauties of this, what I call my day job, is it's really incredible to be able to have someone half your age come in and just school you on a new thing that they may have a lot to learn themselves and are green as can be at recording or something or whatever, but people will come in and surprise me daily with like, whether it be just some sort of weird new technique or weird new piece of gear or weird way of working, the way they write, the way they keep their notes down, anything. There's so many. I mean, like I said, that's a very broad answer, a broad question that I can answer, but at the same time, it's always exciting to me because it makes when I go in to make a record of my own interesting, because I don't have to do the same old thing on every one of them. I don't have to go about it going, nope, this is how I record it, this is how I write it, this is how it is done. I'm not that way anyway, so it actually works great to be a sponge sometimes and have people come in and go like, oh, you've never tried doing something, you've never tried doing it like this? And I'm like, no, I didn't know you could. And
right.
That's a wonderful thing. It's like it just discoveries every day. It's like Christmas every day,
No, it is. And it kind of ties into your earlier talking about when you were with your first band and there's this epical change in what the cultural zeitgeist is as far as music. And you had a lot of people that couldn't make that change along with you, but you were down to clown basically. Like you were excited about this new change. How have you maintained that sense of curiosity over the course of a couple decades? That's a hard thing to maintain.
Well, you don't always maintain it, and I should not sugarcoat it. You slump, and you go in and out of inspiration, and also you're like, oh shit, I'm running out of content here. I'm running out of ideas. How many more songs can I write about this?
Right.
Because let's face it, you have your whole life to write your first record and usually 6 hours to make your second record. And then after
Right.
that, you're on the run. You're just going. And so sometimes you need a year off or sometimes 2 years off to get inspired to want to even do it again because I don't know. The slumps that I hit were when I reached burnout from doing it too much. And that would have been like just hearing music for so long and never a break from it and going out and doing 200 shows a year and then any day off that I was home I was making records for people.
Yeah.
That's never taking a break. My ears would hurt and my brain would start to hurt and it would be like, oh, I know a lot of people are like, oh, complaining about that is trivial and petulant, but it's really not. I mean, if it's your livelihood and it starts to be your livelihood and you want to maintain it as your livelihood, you've got to stay inspired and passionate about your work. Just like if you go to a restaurant that people are just phoning it in and shitty service and you're never going to go back there. So, I don't ever want to phone it in. So, that sets the bar a little unrealistically high sometimes when you have been doing it for so long and you're constantly looking for inspiration to reinvigorate your pen and reinvigorate your mind and your mouth to make something worthy.
It is. I mean, you use the restaurant analogy there, and I think it's useful to us as musicians and songwriters to remember that if you've been going to a restaurant for years and you love it, you go have one shitty meal there because the kitchen staff is tired of cooking and there's bad service. You don't go back to that restaurant anymore.
No.
You know what I mean? And it's the same. People can love your music for a long time and you put out one inspired album and they got a lot of other stuff going on in their lives. So they just say, oh yeah, Joe Pug, I used to like him. I don't like him anymore. Oh, Butch Walker. Yeah, he made some good records back then, but his last one. So the moment
Heard
that you, yeah, well, haven't
about
we all?
myself, not about you. About
No,
myself.
no, that's what I'm saying. Haven't we all? So it's a useful reminder that putting out uninspired work. I mean, not only is it in a way kind of spiritual death as an artist, but it is the beginning of the end when it comes to just the brass tacks and the bottom line.
Well, and let's not forget that, I know for myself at my age, I came up in a time where you were lucky if your music ever got critiqued or criticized on a platform because it would have been like in a Rolling Stone or a major magazine or even a local rag where you were just happy to be noticed and you might not have been happy with this snobriety elitist opinion that would be given because back then they didn't just give the critic pen to just anybody. They were people that had a love-hate relationship with music because they lived and breathed it. Let's consider now everyone and their mother has a platform and is a critic. So you can absolutely on a mass level be musically canceled. If you put out something that sucks or is shitty to everybody. So the quality control is harder, but the filter it's not as narrow now. It's a very big drain. And so you have to really, really think about it. If you're going to put out art now, you have to be prepared for it to be reviewed by everyone. And we're talking anyone from 9 to 90 years old. So
it's brutal. I want to close today by talking a little bit about you put out a record in 2015 that really affected me. It was called Afraid of Ghosts, and it really deals with your father and the passing of your father. I'm very close with my father. It seems like from that record and from other stuff that I've seen you post on social media, this, that, or the other, that you had a very close relationship with your father. Can you speak to that a little bit and also kind of speak to what your career in music meant to him and what carrying on playing music means in the context for you between your relationship with him?
Sure. My father, Big Butch, he grew up very, like a small mining town in northern Georgia, Navy vet. Country music was about it
Yeah.
for him. So, and coupled with going through a midlife crisis and losing his parents and everything, by the time he was, in his 40s, and here's this only son, the youngest of three kids, and his only son, long hair, earrings, eyeliner, wearing spandex pants, all the things that would be a nightmare to, basically this dude who grew up just this very staunch, small town, almost small minded, man, rough around the edges, gruff exterior, but full of love, full of his big heart. And he loved me, but he did not love the teenage me, I don't think. And I think he wrote it off as, well, okay, cool. Well, statistically, this guy's going to be a loser because he's going to go off to LA in a heavy metal band and be the cliche, which easily could have happened, and to an extent did happen a few times in my life where I needed to get $100 here and there to get bailed out. But I think when I moved to LA, when I was 18, and I was really scared, but exhilarated and ready to do it. My dad always said, he was, I could tell he wasn't really for it, but he said, you should only regret the things that you've tried. Don't regret not trying it, or whatever. I'm saying it wrong, but it's like, don't miss an opportunity. You can always come home.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he said to me, and it stuck. And I was like, okay. I think, when I got out there and I didn't really ask for anything, I just worked my butt off and did what I could and handed out flyers and worked telemarketing jobs and delivery jobs and whatever I could do. And then when my band got signed, we got a publishing deal and everything. It certainly wasn't the be all end all, but it was something where he was like, oh, he can do this. He's going to make something of himself. Because my dad was just, we were middle class growing up. We didn't have luxuries. But he worked hard for every cent, and he made me work hard for it. And I think we rebonded as buddies after that. And all through the 90s, he became my biggest fan, no matter what. If I was playing to 10 people in the middle of fucking nowhere in a club, 200 nights a year, which is what I was doing a lot in the 90s,
Mm-hmm.
he would be there. He would be there at shows that he could drive to. He would go. And he would come. Sometimes, my mom would come, but he was at a point where in his life, I think he had hit a crossroads and was, he was retiring from work and everything. And so he wanted to come make up for some lost time, I think. And so he came and spent a lot of time on the road selling merch at my shows. And just all of a sudden, it was just a different guy. He loved what I did. And he would start to, he would come to the hotels and stay with us, in a shitty motel at night and get up and drive in the van with us to shows. It was surreal, but it was amazing. And he just became the band dad in our toughest times. And then I had, Marvelous 3 happen, and then another, like I said, that runaway one-hit wonder song that took off, and all of a sudden I went from being the brokest I'd ever been in my life at 27 years old, and not a pot to piss in, and squatting on a guest house floor, and driving a $100 Volvo station wagon that I only had $80 to pay for. My dad chipped in the $20 extra for me to get it. And I drove the wheels off that thing, and he, like I said, he was my biggest supporter and biggest fan, but he certainly didn't have the money to financially support me. It was more emotional support, which was invaluable and the most priceless support you can get, especially
Yes.
from your parents, from your dad. And so after that, I started to do well, and it just climbed from there. And my dad would always say, you throw it up against the wall, it's going to stick eventually. And he would just always be throwing these Southern quips at me and making me feel not useless at a time when I started to feel really down on myself and useless and like it wasn't going to work out because I was approaching 30. And I was like, I haven't made it. I haven't done anything. And all these people are coming up around me and being successful. And I can't get a break. I can't get a break. And finally I did. Mm-hmm. And I got to a point where I was, and then the producing career took off, and then I became a sustaining artist on my own mm-hmm. right, and being able to go out and play to people without having to worry about having a song on the radio and all that. And that, to me, those were all successes. And he was right there until he was literally on oxygen tanks from having, congestive heart failure and pulmonary fibrosis of the lungs, and mm-hmm. eaten up with rheumatoid arthritis, lived an unhealthy life. But at the same time, he would still come to shows with those fucking oxygen tanks on his back, and be in the back of the room just so proud and so happy. And I'd point him out from the audience with my mom out there, and everybody loved my dad. All the fans would come, and he loved that. He never got that growing up, so I think he loved getting that attention and being recognized as a good man. Mm-hmm. And so he passed away finally after 5 years of battling this long demise that eventually pancreatic cancer is what got him on 24 hours of diagnosis, actually. That's how much it had already taken over. And luckily I was with him, and I'd started writing all these songs about him that I knew imminent death was coming. I just knew it was pending. And I this was me coming into a new phase of life, which was becoming an adult and a man for the first time, instead of just a childish kid in a band, even at whatever age. He definitely inspired me after that tenfold, and I wrote this album that you speak of, Afraid of Ghosts, that I wrote right after he passed, and recorded it in 4 days. And still to this day, it's a very misunderstood record for fans of mine, because I don't think a lot of those people were ready to be so bummed out by me. And the songs are very much a bummer. But if I had $1 for every time somebody came up to me at a show after I put that record out, still to this day, that just lost a loved one and was like, I didn't really get it, and now I get it. And, that record still to this day, I think I'm most proud of, just because I'm proud to be his son.
Well, I don't care if people are bummed out by it or not. I've loved that record since day one, and I'm ride or die for that one, man.
I appreciate it.
It's a beautiful tribute to your old man. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, Butch. Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Sorry if I ramble too much.
No, this was great. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Butch Walker's latest album is entitled American Love Story, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, An expensive drug habit is not a song. A compelling Instagram account is not a song. And most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself. And for you, just keep your eye on the song.